You use these services probably every day. What are the threats associated with cloud service models? We're going to talk about that coming up next.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Yep, another great episode here at IT Pro TV. We're talking CySa Plus, and more specifically, we're going to be diving into not the cloud service models, but the threats that are associated with them. And let's go ahead and start at the top of the stack. Let's talk a little bit about software as a service or SaaS platforms. What are the threats we can expect?
Yeah, that's a good question because, well, SaaS is very popular. We probably use SaaS every day. Some examples of SaaS is something like Google Apps, Dropbox, Salesforce, MailChimp, Zendesk, DocuSign, Slack, HubSpot. I'm reading a list, but that's how I know those because I read them. But we're probably familiar with at least one or two, maybe even multiples of that list. We use this type of cloud service on a daily basis. But if I am using that, and that is a part of my environment, I need to be aware of those threats. So we got to get into that software as a service as a conversation when it comes to the threats and vulnerabilities that are associated with said service. That being said, let's jump right into that. We have the threats. Phishing, right? So because this is software as a service, if I were a threat actor, if I were a threat actor, if I can use English correctly, I would want to gain access to your SaaS. That would be one of my primary goals. That would be something on the top of my list. Phishing campaigns are very successful at performing that very activity. Is if I send Wes a phish email and it looks legit, it looks good, and he clicks that link, I'm probably going to get to grab some creds, maybe install some software if I'm malware inclined. But those creds, if I grab them and they are for that specific SaaS platform, then I'm going to now have access to that, and that's what I'm looking for. From there, I can do all sorts of malfeasance, and I'm a crazy person. Next would be that it kind of moves in right into that account compromise. If I'm able through phishing to compromise accounts, or through password guessing or spraying or whatever other technique that I'm going to employ to gain that unauthorized access into that system, well, then I can use that system to exfiltrate data, get information about the user base. Who knows? Sky's the limit, really, from that case, especially depending on what user I'm able to compromise. Wes might just be a standard user, but if I'm an admin and I get my account compromised, well, then we really have an issue, right? Because now you got the keys to the kingdom. So it's something that we have to be aware of as a threat to those SaaS platforms. Other things include things like malware and 0 days. Those are some big dogs right there. Now, we're talking about these things. The last one would be that I'm going to mention is insider threats. I want to move into the responsibility, the areas of responsibility, because there are, it's not just me as a consumer, but it's also my provider. They have an area of responsibility as well. So we have to keep that in mind, and we got to know who's responsible for what.
You know, Dan, in a lot of the other courses that we teach, we talk about looking at those, when it comes to cloud service models, we talk about those responsibility matrices, right? And I know this, when it comes to SaaS, the majority of the responsibility is on the cloud service provider, but there is still, looking at that matrix there is still a certain bit of responsibility on the customer side too, right?
That's exactly. And let's start there. Let's start with what is our responsibility as a customer that is using a SaaS service. And that would really be a couple of things that we want to point out specifically. There are others, but these are the big dogs. Accounts, right? Making sure that we are doing what we're supposed to do as far as our accounts, using good passwords, maybe using password management, employing 2FA or MFA if that is available to us from that system. Hopefully it is. And also taking backups, at least to some extent, right? So if we have data that we're using that's going in and out, that we have that information backed up somewhere else. Therefore, if we lose access to that system for whatever reason, we still have our information and we can get access to it. So that's going to be our responsibility as consumer. And then we move into as Wes was pointing out, the CSP, the cloud service provider's responsibility. That's going to be a bigger lift, and probably why you're using a SaaS provider, because I just want to push that risk off onto them, and they have to basically get all application security, right? The infrastructure that it's running, that's their problem. right? So if anything goes wrong, like if the application gets breached, that is on them. They should have been doing a better job of looking for injections or cross-site scripting, that kind of stuff. You name it, that's their business. That web application is something that they need to be guarding and protecting, patching, updating, doing all that stuff.
Let's think about this, Dan. Way back in the day, and I say way back in the day being a whole
Way back,
decade.
7 weeks ago.
Yeah, exactly. Not that long ago. I know you've worked for a major organization, had a lot of branches everywhere. I can only imagine that, in the day that you were there was a lot of Exchange servers, and they were on-prem, right? That's a common, it's a common software, what we need, email. And I can't imagine the security that would have to go on in-house when it comes to something like that platform. Now, in the cloud, we get the benefit of all of that being abstracted. So there's a lot of responsibility in that aspect.
Correct.
If you're just looking at a specific application, it's all applications,
Yeah.
but this is just one, right?
Yeah, that's just one. So, a good point, and thanks for bringing that up. But probably why we're using those SaaS in the first place, those SaaS platforms in the first place, because we get to push that off onto them. That is not our responsibility. Our responsibility.
I thought you were going to say, because I've had to manage an Exchange
Yeah,
server, so we're glad to push
That's
that
a lot of work. I'm not
responsibility.
gonna lie. When someone is calling you probably 3 or 4 times a day, can you pull up an email that I deleted 6 days ago?
That's right.
Probably, but I don't know. Here we go.
Don't hold your breath.
Yeah. Actually, in Exchange, it was like, at least when I was doing it, if you deleted an email, it's gone.
It's gone. There ain't no bin bucket.
Yeah.
So that's software as a service, right?
Yeah.
But then we've got another stack that we've got to worry
Correct.
about. If we move down in the stack, you should know these by route. Remember, there's some assumed knowledge here that we're talking about platform as a service. Now we're talking about the runtime environments that need to be created. You probably heard a thing or two about things like containers. What are some of the threats that we need to worry about when it comes to platform as a service?
Yeah, that's the good old PaaS, right? And you might recognize some of these. I got another list, right? AWS, Elastic Beanstalk, Heroku, Windows Azure. It has a lot of PaaS stuff involved in it. Force.com, OpenShift, Apache Stratus, Magento, Commercial Cloud. These are PaaS services. But basically what we're saying is I'm going to get access to all the things that I would need to create an application, and I didn't have to do the heavy lift of getting all the machinery, installing all the software and the platforms, the technologies that are going to go to supporting what it is I want to build. I just say, hey, cloud, can I have this? And you pick like an a la carte, and it just spits it. There you go. And you're like, great, now I can just start making cool apps. But there's the rub, right? So that's where the threats start coming into play. And again, we're going to get into the responsibilities of the consumer and whatnot. But let's talk about the threats. Think mostly, my head goes to like OWASP top 10, right? Because you're probably creating some sort of web application because you're accessing these things via the web. So how do I interact with this? How do I interface with this? Usually through some sort of web application. And because of that, I'm going to heavily lean on OWASP, who has done a phenomenal job of helping us understand what the common threats are against web applications and where those weaknesses lie and vulnerabilities. So I would at first run to the OWASP top 10, see those, A1 injection, so on and so forth, cross-site scripting, XML external entity attacks, and so on. Down the line you go and look for those. Use that as kind of a guiding star to making sure that I have security. So don't forget those. Another one would be like using default creds, right? We forget about that because we're deep into testing. I don't have time to change credentials into something robust. Plus, it's not really important right now. And then someone comes on along and says, are you finished? Is that done? And you go, yep, just pushed it to production. Oh, I forgot about them creds, right? That's a very important thing. And it does get overlooked quite often and leads to compromise a lot of times.
So things like platform orphaning. That's one of the things I can think of right away.
Yeah. Happens a lot.
Yeah, we'll spin up some instances. It's really fast, and because of the ease of use, it's also easy to forget too. So you also mentioned, things like, the responsibilities, right? Do we got more to talk about?
Yeah, just one more thing I wanted to throw in the pile as far as the threats that were against PaaS, which is permission issues on cloud data, right? Don't forget to make sure that you have set your permissions correctly on the data that is being accessed by users from the internet, right? Because that's what we're doing. We're creating an internet solution that I can access very easily from wherever I am in the world. If you didn't set the permissions right, you might have an issue We have also seen this happen more than one time, actually more than 10 times, probably even way more than that. Happens every day, most likely. It's just one of those things that we can easily overlook, or it's easy to get permissions wrong. So you need to have some sort of robust mechanism for checking permissions and making sure that they have been set in a more secure way. Again, that's just a threat. That could be, I guess maybe you're doing that already, and kudos for you if you are. Just don't forget it, as that is a possible threat. Now we can get into your areas of responsibility.
So the responsibilities on this one, if I believe right, Dan, now what we're seeing is we're seeing more of that shift into the consumer side,
Right.
because if you think about it, in the first one with SAS, the entire application support was on the CSP side. But now we're starting to see, since we're developing the app, that more of that application security is going to fall in our laps.
Yeah, because you nailed it. You're the one developing the application. How could you expect the CSP to be the one that has to secure it?
Sure,
Right.
sure.
So that responsibility and role sits in our lap as the developers, right? So application security, that's on us. That's what because we're developing the app. So we have to use good practices, use that OWASP and that kind of thing. Access and accounts, right? How are people accessing this system? Well, you're developing it, so it's up to you to make sure that there is a good, robust system using something like multi-factor authentication. Maybe make that happen, probably a good idea, right? And then the accounts themselves, that they have to use robust passwords, that they have to use multi-factor in some way, shape, or form, right? So it's the onus is on us to make sure that that application is secure, that it's not on the cloud service provider. So it starts, like you said, the shift of the scale starts to get a little more even on things. Now, going over to the CSP, they still have to make sure that the technologies that they are providing you are being up to date, right? That the infrastructure that it's sitting on is being secured, right? That, again, is still going to be all on them. So that integrity and availability of those platform components is what we're looking at as far as responsibility on the CSPs.
You know, Dan, I like how you've pointed this out, and I've noticed it in a couple of the episodes that I've had, pleasure hosting with. You always are coming back to that third part of the CIA triad, which a lot of people sometimes forget, that availability is a principle of security. Now, let's go ahead and let's go to the bottom of the stack, all right, when it talks about service models, and let's talk about IaaS. That's right, infrastructure as a service. And now I'm thinking there's a lot of responsibility here, but can we talk about the threats first?
Oh, yeah, let's hit those threats and a couple of IaaS examples probably always help us. So I know Wes has been dying to say IaaS, so it is fun, these fun things we do here.
Bottom of
Right,
the stack.
the bottom
That's right.
of the stack. I like it. I like it. A couple examples, EC2, Rackspace, Google, they all have solutions for this. DigitalOcean, right? These are IaaS solutions, basically giving us access to virtualization infrastructure. Here's a machine. Do what you will, right? And now we're starting to see that not full, but a lot bigger shift in responsibilities we'll get to. But those threats, what are the threats? Everything we've talked about, you name it, it's there, because you're probably developing an application on it. If not, you're storing data on it, so you got to keep that secure. Are you hosting a database inside of there? You're not using a PaaS platform. Maybe you're installing a MySQL instance or a Microsoft SQL server. That's all on you. All they've done is given you a car and from which to drive, and it is up to you to slap on all the fun bits, right? So be very aware that whatever you do with that is going to be your responsibility. If you're running an operating system, you better keep it up to date. That's up to you. If you better be taking backups. That's up to you, because now we're moving into those. I mean, pick a threat. 0 days, injections, you name it. Remote code execution, you name it. It's coming for you, because all you're really using that platform for is to put stuff on, to use as an engine to drive the thing that you're building, right? So anything past that is going to be on you, that onus. Now, the good news is that if a hard drive dies, that's not you, right? That is, if I'm using Amazon and I got an EC2 instance, I say, hey, Amazon, how you doing? Good, glad. How's the kids? My instance is down, and for no good reason. Can you fix that for me? That's them, right? And they owe you a certain level of service, and that's why you fill an SLA, and you pay money for X amount of service. So make sure they're fulfilling their part of that. So don't forget patching of hypervisors and insider threats. That's also on them. So they have a lot of responsibility when it comes to actually delivering that platform and keeping it secure. After that, it's going to be you. So patching operating systems, taking the backups, communicating communication security between components. That's a big one, right? So if I have multiple instances and they are relaying data back and forth to each other, make sure that you're doing that in a secure way. That is up to you. That is not a cloud provider's problem. And also access and accounts. You are developing the accounts. You are creating the way in which they are being accessed, or the structure that you've built is being accessed, and making sure that that is a robust, security-wise as you can possibly make it. Again, not going to be the problem of the cloud service provider. If you get hacked through an account, you can't go crying to Amazon and say, "Oh, we got hacked that way." Right? You should have built a stronger piece of machinery there, and maybe that wouldn't have happened. So hopefully that's helpful. We now understand what some of the threats are to each one of the IaaS, SaaS, and PaaS services that we could be using, and our areas of responsibility when it comes to security. Super helpful for us in real life land, not only for the exam.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, remember, as a cybersecurity analyst, you are responsible for understanding the cloud service models that we've been talking about, as well as the threats associated with the software, the infrastructure, and platform as a service. Thanks for watching. We got a lot more to come in CySa Plus. We hope to see you there.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.